Very, very excited to introduce our next speakers, Jimmie Durham, Cruzvillegas, and Mark Godfrey. Jimmie is an artist, poet, essayist, activist, many, many parallel realities, and we are so delighted to present here at the Serpentine a major survey show of Jimmie, which highlights the many dimensions of his practice, and it's wonderful, wonderful to welcome Jimmie back. It is wonderful also to welcome Cruzvillegas, who has also many parallel realities. He's an active member of the intergalactic Taoist Tai Chi Society, of course a leading visual artist, and also the founder of the auto-construction, the self-construction movement. And here in London, for his site-specific commission at Tate Modern's Turbine Hall, which has just opened with his sculpture, Empty Lot. And of course, the curator of this exhibition of Abraham, Mark Godfrey, who is senior curator of international art at Tate Modern and has curated many exhibitions from Ronnie Horn to Francis Alice, to A Story of Deception, to Gerhard Richter Panorama, to Alighiero Boetti, Richard Hamilton, Sigmar Polke, and now Abraham's exhibition. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Jimmie, to Abraham, and to Mark.
Good morning.
Sorry. Very warm welcome to Abraham. Jimmie, I think it's better that you sit with Jimmie, no? And you sit here. Okay.
That's sure.
Is that good?
Yeah.
So we have, Mark and I prepared some questions, and at the same time, also, we have a song and a poem. But maybe, Mark, you want to start?
Yes, I was struck looking, Jimmie, at your show this morning again by the Cabinet of Stones, and Abraham looking over the Turbine Hall at small shoots. And I was wondering, in a world where we're thinking of such big things nowadays, the migration of people, continued conflict in troubled areas all over the world, why it's important to you both to look at small things like a grass shoot or a small stone.
If you don't look at small things, they often will bite you. When I was a child, that was always the case.
Anything in specific that bit you?
Snakes, wasps, a turtle bit my toe, everything. But I think it's not a separation we want, it's to also look at everything. If you leave something out, you're sorry the next day.
Well, I think, well, there is a nice book that I think almost everybody read it. It's called The Art of War, and it was written by a guy called Sun Tzu. And in that book, he says there is no small enemy.
Yeah.
That it means that you have to respect everything, and there is nothing small, in fact. Nothing is small.
Maybe we could also talk about how both of you met, because I think it would be very interesting to hear about your first encounter, because of course, Jimmie, you moved in the 70s to Cuernavaca in Mexico. And
in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, and we had the other day Gabriel Orozco here, who actually told us about meeting you later in New York. So it would be great to hear about where the two of you met, where Abraham and Jimmie met for the first time.
It was probably at Tim Stokely's, wasn't it?
I think so, but I think we met briefly different times when you were in Cuernavaca, but like with people like Cisco Jimenez or so, and some of the friends living in Cuernavaca. But it was mostly in the 90s and not in Mexico. First of all, I think in Belgium, I mean, when we went together for a group show in a garden called De Brabandere Garden for a show called Tilt. I mean, in a small town called Tilt, and the show was called Veldenbitten, which means sculpture outside. And so we went there, and then we spent some days together properly. Yeah. So it was good for all of us to know each other better than in Mexico.
And can you tell us a bit more, because obviously it would be great to hear more from Jimmie about your time in Cuernavaca. I went once to see their Esquivel, the composer, and it would be great to hear about your experiences there, and of course also from Abraham, because Jimmie, you spent more than a decade there. Abraham, you grew up there, and you, of course, both used these experiences in Mexico deeply for your work. We are even thinking, Jimmie, when we did the exhibition here, because your exhibition at the Serpentine is so much about the time since then. It's about the time you spent since the 90s in Europe. One could almost do one day an exhibition about you and Mexico.
Maria Teresa and I were living in New York, and we moved to Mexico in 86, I suppose, something like that. And I already knew Cuernavaca, and I knew it as like a center for leftist and intellectuals of Latin America, and I had friends there, and so a decade later we moved there, but it was not the same. One decade in Mexico is 100 years. Everything changes. But some of the people were still there. Ivan Illich came back while we were there. Cedric Belfridge was always there. He was translating Eduardo Galeano's Memorial de Fuego. Beautiful trilogy, beautiful books. But he was almost 100 in those days and died in the 90s. But it was a place for stray dogs and stray people and stray cats.
I think in my experience is kind of related to Jimmie's in Cuernavaca, because of my family. Where I grew up, they were very close of a community of people in the Catholic Church called Comunidades Eclesiales de Base, like very similar to the movement de Sem Terra in Brazil, and then we're fighting all of them for the property of the land. And some places were peasants, some other places were, like in my case, like workers in the city. And then this movement came along from Ivan Illich movement, ideas and the schooling society theory. And through Bishop Sergio Méndez Arceo in Cuernavaca, it was spread all around in Mexico. And we learned a lot about democracy, being Catholic. I'm not a Catholic anymore, but anyways, I kept a lot from that experience. And if you attend one of these masses in my neighborhood in Ajusco, they still pray for the union, the workers' union, and the strike, and for the students' movement, and so on. So it's not just about faith or hope in a silly way or naive, but it's very powerful and very political.
I want to ask a question about this word transformation, pairing it with the idea of sculpture, because, at least in our discussions together, Abraham, in the last month, you very much defended what you've done as sculpture rather than installation or intervention. And some of the sculptors, I guess, written about or celebrated a lot in the last year are Jeff Koons and Charles Ray, who I admire in different ways, but the way they transform objects is using the latest technologies, and it's always incredibly, that there are masses of resources, financial resources needed to make the transformations they make. And one thing that you both have in common is a very different type of approach to sculpture, transforming things by choosing them, putting them together, improvising. I'd like to hear both of you talk about what it means to work as a sculptor today with objects in a world with other sculptors using different possibilities.
I think first I'm allowing myself to speak first before Jimmie, because I think I took from Jimmie something very important in the long term, which is about making sculptures, which is we are not creating anything. We are just rearranging things in reality. So this means, we are not God. That's what I understand. And that way, this new arrangement of things should point to a different possible situation for our society and for our individual condition, which means dignity. And this is not harmony necessarily. It can be conflictive anyways, but it's rearranging things so we can have a proper discussion about who we are and where and who with, and what with, of course, objects.
And what with, exactly, yeah. the sculpture that I tell students is the worst I've ever seen. It's rather childish, and it's supposed to be an image of a Jewish man who is a pastor, a sheep herder. But it's in Rome, and it's a great, huge white man. A giant white man is supposed to be this little shepherd, and his name is David. Silly work.
It's a piece of stone, isn't it?
It's a piece of stupid white stone.
Well, just I wanted to add a couple of things which I've been, admired about both of your work. When talking to Abraham about this idea of autoconstruction that Hans-Ulrich brought up, you said that the first time you began to think about that was when you noticed that your father's wheelchair had almost kind of transformed the house that you lived in by every day passing a particular corner and denting it. So eventually a wheelchair had become a sculptural instrument. And Jimmie, I guess the first time I was really struck by your work was when I saw it in a room with Abraham's in Venice, the fantastic piece, which was two painted gold bits of wood, a piece of wood sculpted by a machine, painted by a human, and a piece of wood sculpted by a dog, painted by a human. I'd love to know a little bit more about the idea of animals sculpting.
We are animals, isn't it?
We are animals. That's just what I was going to say. We are animals, and animals always work with us or against us, or we work against them or with them. But I like the idea that we are in this together, whether we want to be or not, whether it works out well or not. We're all in the same boat. And I like material that I find, especially if it's been worked by say a beaver or a dog chewing on a stick. I think sticks were invented so that dogs could entertain humans.
But I like also, that way, similarly, it's not just adding something, but it means something else. That, you can have something that is being worked or carved by rain, by wind, and by other people, not intending to make an artwork, but someone who's been, let's say, destroying a building by demolition, and then it means something very much for me, I think, as well. Destroying as as a creative act, if you can call it that way. But this morning we were talking with Mark about a word I like very much. It's a Greek word. It's called epiphany. And I think I first arrived to such if you can call it an awareness of who I am, or making the question properly, who I am and where I came from, what for and why. It was when I saw a mark on the corner, two walls corner, where my father's wheelchair passed every day through. And then there was a mark, a little groove, or grove, how you say? Groove. Yeah. I like the word groove as well, but anyways. It was every time I went to visit my parents, it was deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I started taking pictures of it. And then I started taking pictures of the whole house, every detail, every single sign of transformation. And then I started taking pictures of every facade of my neighborhood, and then from the city. And then it became kind of an ongoing project that is not finished yet. I think it's definitely unfinished, in fact. So this is called autoconstruction, and it came from that epiphany, from my father making a sculpture, not really wanting to make one.
Yeah.
And that's actually exactly what I wanted to follow up in terms of, because Mark asked you about the notion of sculpture and transformation. I remember, because we had so many conversations, Jimmie, preparing your exhibition at the Serpentine, so many wonderful conversations with Julia and Lamira and all of us. And the first conversation, however, happened on a bench under a tree in Venice, when we were supposed to meet, and you said we shouldn't meet in a cafe, but it would be very nice to meet under a tree. And I remember that in this conversation under the tree, you talked about this idea of transformation and the unfinished. And this idea also that, I mean, works often are fragmented and allow the viewer to enter. So it would be great to hear a little bit more about that unfinishedness in relation to transformation, and then maybe a bit more from Abraham also about how that ties in with autoconstruction, where that obviously also plays a big role.
Yeah.
But maybe Jimmie first.
I don't remember what unfinished work we talked about in Venice, but I have a lot of unfinished things, and I don't think I'll ever die, but if I did, I hope I would die with a lot of unfinished things. But a thing that every time I come to London, I intend to bring a film script that I have not yet written, but I almost have written it. And I want to try to hawk it to some producers and rich folks in London and make a film. But haven't done it yet, so I have to keep coming back.
Well, I don't know. In my case, I always think of myself as an unfinished promise, which is my parents' promise of love and hope and constructing something together. And this is, I mean, my very unstable and contradictory identity gives evidence of this promise as something that is still to happen.
And when you mentioned your epiphany, actually, I wanted to ask Jimmie about this, because Jimmie, you told us when we talked about the exhibition in the park, and we told us there is a lake, you told us about your epiphany in one of your many epiphanies in Geneva, when all of a sudden there was a transformation, because you were in Geneva as a political activist, and all of a sudden one day in the lake, you know, made a performance, made a performative sculpture. Yeah. Can you tell us about that Geneva epiphany and transformation, which kind of ties in with the park here, so it's a nice connection to the lake here.
I moved to Geneva in '69, and I had been living in Texas and Arkansas, Louisiana, so on, horrible places. And I had not been to Europe before. I had been all over the South Pacific, I'd been all over the Americas, but I had not been to Europe. And it was many years before I went to New York after that. But I remember sitting on a park bench, a public bench, and there was a joint of marijuana on the bench. And I thought it was somebody trying to trap me. So I just scooted over, and then a bunch of motorcycles came up. And I thought, uh-oh, now I'm in for it. And they stopped. Two guys got off and said, could I give them directions to someplace? And I was ready for a fight. And they didn't want to fight. They were Swiss. But I started making work to be public, because there are, at that time, no galleries in London, in Geneva, and nothing going on in culture much. But I started making things to throw into the lake and retrieve, I knew that people would watch, and I knew that they wouldn't see it as sculpture, they wouldn't see it as art, they wouldn't know how to see it, so they could just look at it, I thought, that people could just look at things. And they did. I tied one sculptural piece up to a post and left it there. And every day I came back and watched it, and the Geneva garbage truck would come, and two guys would stand and look at it and look at everybody. But on the fourth day, they took it away. But everybody looked at it, and they seemed to enjoy looking at it, and it didn't have a category of existence. It just existed. And I liked thinking that way.
Another thing that fascinates me that I think you have in common is something around the relationship of the weight of history and a lightness of touch in both of your works. In Jimmie, in your show, you've got a piece, I think, The History of Europe, where somehow there's the whole weight of European history of nations fighting nations, people fighting people, but the work has this wonderful light touch of poetics to it. And in Abraham, in your sculpture in the Turbine Hall, you know, in some way the history of protest movements, the Tierra y Libertad movements are all there. The history of avant-garde art practices are also there, but never burdening the work. And I'd like you just to talk about that balance between weighty history and light touch, if it makes sense to you. How you achieve that.
What I like about history, and I have this mostly from Maria Teresa, working with plant history and human history with plants, history is more complex than we can possibly know. Even in the largest or smallest way of looking at it, it's bigger than, more complex than we can know. And when it comes to things that humans do historically that are extremely important and sometimes never known, never seen as important, but they will be. 50,000 years, something will have happened to make us, maybe nobody will ever know the importance, but the importance has happened, has become part of our lives. And I think it is more the complexity of things that I like than the smallness. But I love the fact that everything is poetical. Everything wants to sing or make some rhythm or something.
I think I share with Jimmie this vision of history maybe as literature, probably. It's written, and then it's an approach that is subjective, arbitrary, capricious, unstable, and many, many times very stupid. And I like very much the idea of embracing history not as a truth, but as a construction and as a friction, but of course as a fiction as well. And then I think we can use language to construct our own histories, our own literature, our own friction properly. This way, political references and even propaganda can be there, but not the way we understand it in a superficial way. And if it's necessary, if it's needed, and it's an urgency for something, then you go out to the streets to demonstrate and to fight for something. I think that's the way.
Now we have one last question, which is the only recurrent question, as you both know, about the unrealized project. And we've just experienced Pina Bausch actually realizing her unrealized project. Tino Segal mentioned earlier today that actually Pina sometimes handed out some water or things, but there was never the idea of involving the audience in a piece. That happened today for the first time here at the Serpentine Sacra Gallery, the unrealized project of Pina Bausch. I was wondering, Jimmie and Abraham, now at the moment that you both have big exhibitions in London and show so much realized work, if you have any projects which have been too big to be realized or too small to be realized, or dreams, or censored projects. Or, I mean, Doris Lessing, when Rem and I interviewed her for the marathon in 2006, she said, there's not only the projects which we couldn't realize because they're too big, or the censored projects, but there are also the self-censored projects we maybe haven't dared to do. So there's a whole range, so it's just great to hear about one of your unrealized projects.
I have one. It's a dream more than an unrealized project. And it's myself singing with an orchestra behind me, all wearing white clothes, with my head shaved, and singing Como la Cigarra, following Mercedes Sosa with the beautiful lyrics by Maria Elena Walsh. That's my unrealized dream.
That's very nice.
We've got to make it happen.
Absolutely. And Jimmie, yours?
For many, many years, I've dreamed of starting a school, but it wouldn't have teachers and students. It would be a place where people come together, and we wouldn't call it art or any special category, but we would be doing things. We would be doing art, I suppose, or doing poetry, or doing anything that came up in our minds. And we would be trying to give each other energy and a little intelligence.
Now, there is a rumor that actually there is a song.
I have a song.
Poem.
I don't know if
so it might happen.
Is this the time? The moment, I mean?
Mark, do you have more questions, or is it the moment?
I mean, I like writing lyrics. I mean, I know nothing about music. That's why my dream is about singing. But anyways, and I love when I listen to Jimmie singing, because he dares, and he's a fantastic singer. And so I wrote this new song that I hope I will find a group or a band or a musician to create the music for these lyrics. It's called El Corrido de Jimmie Durham. And I will sing it. Jimmie was a very shy boy when he knew nicely how to smile. He did good with tools and hands, both to plastic and on wood. He used glue when necessary, but screwing made it better. He spoke nice words in Cherokee, singing the harder they come. Politicians fear him deeply, 'cause his poetry is destructive, as his language shakes the structures to demolish all the buildings. Cherry blossoms are his words, guacamole is very spicy, as my lyrics are just peanuts, now I need a pint of beer. Fly, 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 dear Palomita, sit on that queen's tree so high, to sing all the strange adventures of the great Jimmie Durham. Ay la la la.
Thank you. Very nice.
Sorry.
No, this is the bad one. Very nice.
And now I think, Jimmie, we have the possibility to listen to a new poem which you wrote on the plane on the way to London.
Yeah. And Amir God just typed it up for me, because I just had it written on a notepad. It's also about peanuts. Peanuts are part of the airplane experience. Roasted and lightly salted peanuts are an essential part of the luxury of traveling on a jet airplane. Jet-propelled with no propeller. Peanuts are aptly named. Peas that are nut-like. Their origin is the low foothills flowing from the Amazon to the Andes. Flowers bloom normally like any pea blossom, then bend and drop, growing the pods underground. I learned as a child to eat the shells and all when first pulled by the roots from the ground. A small plastic bottle of Chardonnay can properly accompany a box of peanuts, although now not in Scandinavian airplanes. Peanuts, even privately taken on board, are not allowed, nor are alcoholic beverages, lest something objectionable happen. Neither choke nor have a stroke riding as a passenger on an airplane, although the beautiful women serving at our convenience stand ready to assist as necessary. Best also not to burn leaves of tobacco, a plant originally from North America. And that ain't hay. That's just chicken feed. Fucking peanuts. Thank you.